on the things that we're staying on top of. Remember that the 27th, we have a thing over here at the church on Saturday morning at 11 o'clock. We're going to be doing what they're calling the Olympics, and that is going to be one of those things where it's a family-friendly type thing. You don't have to have kids. It will be for adults as well, but it's kind of a kickoff to the Olympics. It's only going to be about an hour, and then we're going to have food and stuff, and we're doing that in partnership with Woodlawn. They're actually the ones that are hosting it, and it's going to have some fun games that they're going to be doing, like running around with balloons and different things, just to have fun and kind of do something in the middle of summer. I hope that you will make plans to be there. Today, as we start, next week we will finish up Hebrews, and in Hebrews there, chapter 13, it talks about praying for our leaders. And it's not the only time in Scripture that it talks about praying for our leaders, and we will discuss that next week, but that is one of the things that as Christians that we are called to do, right? And I don't think that there's a more specific in time in history that I could point to in my lifetime of where we shouldn't be more challenged to pray for our country than we are right now. Okay, there is a lot going on, especially in the political landscape, but also in the world in general. But to be praying for our country that we were born into, our leaders, and the different things that we have in life, that is something that is very much a mark of a Christian. And if in your heart, during this particular time, you have hate, you have malice towards anyone, that is very much not a mark of a Christian. Regardless if you agree with people or not. And so today, I do want to start off that way, and I want to talk about marks of a Christian. I want to talk about Christian fruit. That's the title of the sermon today as we're going through Hebrews, Christian fruit. Me and Mary were talking the other day, and we were reminded, because for the first time, and I've seen anyway, they probably sell it every week, every day for 300 decades, I don't know. But for the first time, for me, seeing it in Publix, they had in the fruit section these cherry plums, right? And they had just a bunch of them. And these cherry plums, to me, taste like wild plums growing up. They're the smaller plums. They taste like the plums that we would eat off of trees, and me and Mary were both making the comment that that's how they tasted and everything. And then, you know, it just got me thinking about wild plum trees, and that's where my mind goes. I go down rabbit trails and stuff like that. But interesting little fact, maybe you knew it, maybe you didn't know, but do you know that you will never find a wild plum tree in the middle of a field? You'll never find a wild plum tree in the woods, anywhere. There's only one place that you'll ever find wild plum trees. Can you guess? Down fence lines on the road. It's the only place you'll ever find wild plum trees. Do you know why? Because there's no such thing as a wild plum tree. People plant plum trees, and then what happens is the birds will come and get the fruit, and they will go and they will light upon either light lines or fences. They'll eat it, and the seeds will drop down, and who knows, 1 out of 100 of those seeds, a tree will come up right there, but you'll find them right down fence lines. You'll find them right down power lines and stuff, because that's where the birds come and eat the seeds, and that's where they drop, and they'll eventually grow into fruit trees. And when they grow from their source out in the wild, they grow smaller, and they're considered wild plums. I thought that was pretty good start to today, because what I like about that is that you can look, that you can gauge, that if the bird had the mentality or the desire to look, it could tell of where its fruit was, right? Just by looking down the fence line and seeing those trees coming up. And we too should be able to look at our lives and look down the fence line and see where our fruits are growing up. see the evidence of where we've been. And today, the author in Hebrews talks about how we can take a look at ourselves and see, are we really putting forth the fruit? Are we living Christian lives? And these are some values in practical Christian living. So we start in 13 and we start in verse 1, and the very first thing that we start with is this challenge to have this trait to love each other like family. In Hebrews 13:1 it says, let brotherly love continue. Let brotherly love continue. So we're to love each other, but it says to let it continue like brotherly love, right? Like family. You're to love one another. Elsewhere in Scripture, we have in Romans 12:10, it says, love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. All right, we love each other in such a manner that we're trying to outdo one another in the way that we love each other. That's not just a feeling. That's just not like, okay, well, I do love the people that are around me. Now, when it's talking about love one another in these sections, what is it talking about? It's talking about here, right? Your church family. It's talking about other believers right here. At this point, we're going to talk about other people in a minute. But to love one another as family. To outdo one another in displaying that love and displaying honor towards one another. And that's not just simply, okay, well, when I see Evan, I'm going to go up and I'm going to hug him. Right? That's love, and it is love. Like if I'm going to hug him, I don't just run around, whether y'all believe it or not, just hugging strangers, okay? Like I don't just run up to people and just bear hug them and say, oh, it's so great to see you, and I'm so happy for you. No. That's what you do with family, right? And that's good. But that's not to what this is calling us to do. It says to love each other in a way that we're outdoing one another. Now that's a next level love. That's intentional. That's planned out. That's outside of convenience. Convenience is when I see you, I'll tell you I love you. Convenience is that when I see you, I'll hug you. Convenience is that when it's opportune for me and there's something you got going on, I'll help you with that. That's convenience. This is outside of convenience. This is treating them like their family. And if anybody can agree on anything, family is not convenient. It's not. Many times where it's not convenient. My wife's introduction to my family, she was blown away. I worked with my dad, and my dad, we worked 13, 14-hour days. Me and my wife, we got a house about 2 miles from my parents' house. It was the very beginning of our marriage. I've been working all week, working long days, and all of a sudden we get a phone call at the house, and my mom wants me to come back over to the house, or well, actually my sister's house, and help her get a snake or something like that. A mouse? A mouse. And so I had to drive back over because that's what you do, right? Your mom calls, family calls and everything. You want to help out. My sister needs help. I'm going to go over there and everything. But I still remember that because Mary was like, you just left from over there. You just left from over there. I ain't seen you yet. Right? It's not always convenient, but they're family. John 13:34-35 says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Oh, I just want to pause right there. I hope Tina watches this week. It was inconvenient, Tina. All right. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Right? We're to love as family. Now, what's different about loving somebody, just loving somebody and loving them as family? Can you demonstrate love to other people and not consider them family? Because that's not what we're called to do. We're called to love each other in brotherly love, and family love is what that really means. there's a difference in how we identify, right? Because in family, it's an us and them type thing in the world, right? Like when I used to do stupid things, my dad would be like, "You're dragging the Lewis's name in through mud," or something. You know, it's the Lewis's. That's who we are, and blood is thicker than water, and there's this identity in who you are as a family. It's a we, and then everybody else is a them. Don't disappoint us, or we need to be better, but it's always we. When somebody's part of your family, they become a part of the we, and they're no longer the them. And so in your church family, do you think of the people around you as a part of your we, or is it still them? Are they part of that inner circle? Do you love them inconveniently? Do you love them more? And desire to honor them more, because that's what a Christian trait is. And you know that when you're doing that you have a Christian fruit. Now these fruits, what is the purpose of these fruits, right? To witness about Christ, to point other people to Christ, to actively, demonstrably show the gospel in action, right? It's to give God glory. So when we're living in this way, we're giving God glory, we're being His witness, so that we can point others to Christ. That's why, and this is one of the things that we must do. Second thing that it says to do, another trait, another fruit, is to show hospitality to strangers. Hebrews 13:2 says, "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares." And then Matthew 25, Jesus says in 25:35, "For I was hungry and you gave me food, I was thirsty and you gave me drink, I was a stranger and you welcomed me," right? He's telling them this is how it should be. So hospitality as strangers is that desire to be looking beyond ourselves for the opportunity to now love on others. And what does hospitality look like? Jesus gave us many examples. One of those examples is foot washing, right? That's an extreme. So when we're thinking about hospitality, sometimes we're like, oh man, it's a little bit outside of my nature, but I guess that when I'm driving down the street, I'll wave at people. I'm being very hospitable, right? Just by waving. You think that's what Christ is calling us to do, just to wave at people, maybe smile so that they don't see us frowning or grimacing or whatever? No. Hospitality is that next measure, right? Of welcoming them in. How do I know when people are cold? How do I know when people are hungry? How do I know when people are in need? Is God saying, okay, Danny, the only time that I want you to be hospitable is when people come up to you and announce that they're cold, that they have a need, that they're without. And then open your door and take care of that. Is that what God wants of us? No, He wants us looking out for people. He wants our eyes on others in our neighborhoods, in our community, in the world, and He wants us to be aware that they have a need, because not many people go around announcing their needs. Not many people will let you know that they're thirsty or they're hungry or they're without. And so it's not okay that you're not hospitable to strangers, to your neighbors, just because you don't know, because you have secured yourself behind your front door and you no longer look out into the world. That's not what is a trait of a Christian. You're looking beyond yourself and you're looking for those needs. And when you see those needs, you're seeking God to share with you exactly what it is that you're needing to do to show His glory, to be His witness, to point them towards Him. In 1 Peter 4:9 says, "Show hospitality to one another without grumbling." Now this is even harder, right? Without grumbling. Because I can tell you what I can do. I can be convicted by somebody. Somebody can say something. My wife or somebody else can say something. I'm like, oh, you're right. But I'm called to do it without grumbling. In my heart, with my mouth. And it starts with looking outward. So that's, one of the challenges of today is look outward. See the people around you. Look for their needs. Invite them into this, your home. Invite them here. Invite them into our lives. And let God work. Number 3, he says to remember the suffering. Hebrews 13:3 says, remember those who are in prison as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you also are in the body. Let's read between the lines and see what he's saying here, right? Remember those who are in prison. I'm sure right there in your Bible, in your translation that I don't have up here in front of me, there's probably some parentheses, right? And it probably in your Bible might say something like, remember those who are in prison that you feel are probably falsely accused and that you might could get along with and probably don't stink or haven't done things that you think are disgusting or you think are horribly wrong. I'm sure your interpretation says that those that are in prison that you feel like probably didn't get a fair break in the justice system, just those people that are in prison. And if you can find those people in prison, then those are the ones that you should be remembering, right? That you should be outside your bubble thinking about. I am a student of the Bible, and by far don't know everything from every interpretation. So if you have one of those interpretations, could you please raise your hand, because I want to study that one too. No? So then in your Bible, along with mine, right, it says, remember those who are in prison. No parentheses? And then it says to remember them as though you are in prison with them. Think about those that are suffering. Whether they did it to themselves or not is not what's asked of us. Think of those that are suffering. And then we're to remember them. We're to keep them in mind. We're to be praying for them. We're to be challenged about our role in pointing them to Christ, because that's what this is all about. That's what fruits are all about. What is our role in people that are suffering's lives to the point where we're placing ourselves in their shoes? You ever done that? It's hard, right? And especially hard, and I think that the reason that they use people, because it does go on to say, and those who are mistreated since you are also in the body. So it goes on to say mistreated, but intentionally here, God uses the example of those that are in prison so that maybe we can place ourselves in those shoes, right? And a lot of people, they say they can, because I don't know how many times I've heard the expression, there but for the grace of God goes me. Have y'all ever heard that expression? Right? Well, some people will be like, well, I've done a lot of wild stuff when I was younger, or I did this or whatever, and if I had ever got caught, then that could have been me. I could have been in prison for something. I could have gotten in trouble for something. So there, but for the grace of God, goes me. That's what they'll say. Maybe that's the case, maybe that's not the case, but what is asked of us is that we're to consider these people as though we're in prison beside them. So what does that look like? What does it look like that whether it's your decision or you're falsely accused that you've lost all your freedom? You don't even have control over when and how to cut off the lights in a room. That you no longer have any identity except for what someone tells you. And then, as you're planning for the next step in your life, all the stigma that's going to stick to you as you're coming out and all the opinions and everything else, right? Every single story that I've ever heard of someone that has hit rock bottom, whether they're in prison or jail or whatever, every single successful story I've ever heard, there was some Christian that was looking outside of their bubble that helped to point them to Christ. And all of us are supposed to be 5:36 says, I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Galatians 6:2 says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Man, you're going to notice that like as we're going through these right here, and we're going to finish up 13 next week, you're going to notice that God is challenging us to look beyond ourselves. Every single one of these is going to be a challenge to look beyond ourselves. And to be aware of our testimony, to be aware of the fact that as we go forth, that our role is to point to God, is to bring Him glory. It's not just a feeling that we have inside, it's to be that witness. And so the challenge here is how can I identify and come alongside to point others that are suffering to God? The fourth thing is that in this passage we're called to honor our marriage. Hebrews 13:4 says, let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. This right here makes sense to me. Does this make sense to you? Right? That it is wrong to be sexually immoral, to commit adultery. Does that make sense to you? Let marriage be held in honor among all. So we're going to talk about this honor in just a second, but let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. To me, that's almost as obvious, as blatant as if this morning when you all walked in, I told you, hey, you should not leave today and go out and commit murder. Right? I don't know if any of you are aware, but you shouldn't go out today and commit murder. And if nobody's told you that, let this be your notice that that's wrong. And everyone's like, well, yeah, I have that in my head. And so when I read something like that, that's the way I think that most married people would read this. Like, I got married, I know it's wrong to sleep with somebody else. I think this is the most obvious thing. And then you think, well, maybe everybody else doesn't know this is wrong. Maybe I'm the only perfect creature that's ever walked on the earth, because I see a lot of people cheating, and you read about it, and you see all these divorces and stuff like that. No. I think every single person knows that this is an obvious, blatant thing that you shouldn't do. And that's why it's important that it starts off with here, let marriage be held in honor among all. Because no marriage really, not real marriage, starts off with somebody sleeping with somebody else. It starts off with dishonor in the marriage. And then it goes down a very slippery slope that leads to this. Ephesians 5:31-32 says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. Marriage is about two individuals becoming one. One in God. And when you become one in God, you're representing the relationship that Christ has with the church, right? That's the representation that you have, and you're supposed to hold that in not only high esteem, but you're supposed to honor that. What does it look like to honor that? First off, and I can only speak from the husband's side of things, and I'm sure that Mary could speak from the wife's side of things, but you hold that person in the highest regard. What it means to honor somebody is that, listen, I talk about Mary all the time in here, and that's okay, because I love Mary. And I use my life and everything else as examples so that hopefully in some things that we can figure out how to apply God's truth in our life. And so one of the things in my life is Mary. And I talk about Mary all the time. And you may think, wow, Danny thinks that Mary's perfect. And Danny thinks that their marriage is perfect. I don't. Truth of the matter is that I get up sometimes irritated at Mary. I would argue that she probably gets up far more often irritated at me, right? And so there are stereotypical things inside of every marriage that makes some things funny, right? There are stereotypical ways that a man and a woman can act that sometimes fit the mold of what the world says. And you'll be around somebody else and they'll be joking about their old ball and chain or something like that. This is the very first thing that you can do. Very first thing that you can do is that you can honor the one you're married to by not entering into those conversations. Even if that day you're irritated with them, even if they fit some of the things that are being said and it's funny and you're not really making fun of them, you're not really putting them down, but they fit that mold and it's okay to joke around with some people. No, that's starting to dishonor that person. When you joke about them not treating you like a king, when you joke around about them not doing whatever, but those little bitty things, those little side jokes that are not really demeaning them, they're just a little bit hair on that side. Don't get involved in those things because you're not honoring the other person. And then when you're having conversations in your house, you have to be intentional about honoring the other one. Because there's nobody in your entire life that you will ever meet that can enrage you as much as the person that you're married to. There's nobody that knows more about you, knows every button to push. There's nobody that knows your insecurities. And when they're angry, your first go-to is to start pushing those buttons, to attack those insecurities. And you don't mean to, and it happens, and afterwards you're apologizing, and you're like, no, I assure you that the sun rises with you and sets with you, and I love you to the end of time, and you smell like flowers, and you feel like sunshine, and all of this. You are my mountaintop. But over time, after falling into that cycle of arguing and pushing those buttons, you're going to chip away at something very special. There was a study done a couple of years ago by a psychologist, I have to read the name, Cliff Notary and Howard Markman, and they studied newlyweds for over 12 years in their study. And they found something out. They found out that in their study, the individuals that stayed married and did not get a divorce, that their partners believed, it was judged by what their partner said, they would put in a day's time, in 100 conversations, that there was 5 fewer put downs in every 100 conversations, right? 5 or fewer in 100 conversations. However many conversations it takes to get to 100, there's 5 or fewer put downs in their conversations. The people that got divorced, there was 10 or more put downs in every 100 conversations. Does that make sense? Like, you can honor somebody by lifting them up. And this is where marriages are built. This is where relationships are built, is in the intentionality of how you communicate with somebody. You can be intentional about making sure that you honor your partner in how you joke, and how you communicate with them, and how you talk about them when they're not even around. And as long as you're honoring your partner, you don't look around. You're not looking around because you appreciate what you have. It's the moment where you start dishonoring your partner and they start dishonoring you, and that you're chipping away at each other, that you're looking to fill some void. Normally it's not sexual. Normally it's just self-esteem. Normally it's just a conversation. Normally it's just to be around somebody that's not chipping at you. Because you have gotten to the point of where you dishonor each other. So honor your marriages. 1 Corinthians 6, 18, 20, then when we get to that point, it says, flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin as a person commits is outside the body, but the sexual immoral person sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price, so glorify God in your body. Honor your marriages, honor each other, and avoid ever getting to that point. The last one that we're going to talk about today is a key to happiness in any person's life. It's to be content and trust God. Hebrews 13, 5 through 6 says, keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear what can man do to me. Be content with what you have. Paul says in Philippians 4, 11 through 13, and we talked about 13 not too long ago, but let's read it all in context. Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound, and in every circumstance I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. So no matter where I find myself, if I'm looking to God, I can do all things, right? There was a sitcom, and I think the show was a while back, but I saw it just recently. But there was a sitcom where a husband and wife were talking about, man, the guy said, I have this idea, and if I do this, I'm going to open up this business, and we're going to make a lot of money. They had set some money aside and everything, and so the wife was in agreement. She's going to let him and agree with him to let him have the money and to go run with the business. And he said, this time next year, we're going to be eating on golden plates. That'd be awesome, right? Like just to have golden plates. I think it'd be awesome. I don't think that I would ever show anybody had golden plates, because then they want to come in and rob me. But to be eating on golden plates. But what she said was so amazing. She said, well, would the food taste any different on those golden plates? Right? Will it taste any different on those golden plates than what it tastes like tonight? We want so much. We want so much. When I got my work ethic because I wanted things. And when I was little, I worked and I worked. And by the time I was a teenager, this dates me and also shows how petty I was. But my parents would, for school, they would shop at Kmart. And kids, when I was in elementary school, would make fun of my tennis shoes. They called them Randy's. That's what they called them back then, but they were just cheap Kmart brand tennis shoes. They worked fine. I was able to walk, but I didn't like them, right? You know, like I didn't like them, kids making fun of them and stuff. So when I got old enough and I was working my own job, my very first pair of shoes that I bought for myself were Jordans, right? Like I had to have a pair of Jordans because that's what I wanted, you know? Didn't matter. Huh? It was an awful amount of money that my parents never would have paid, right? Never would have paid for just one pair of shoes, but I paid for them. And I felt better about myself for a while. But then as I got to the point of where I could get a vehicle and I had to pay for gas and I had to pay for other things that my parents weren't paying for because I worked and everything, my expenditures on shoes went down because I started realizing that they all walk the same, right? I can get where I need to in whatever pair of shoes I am. I just have to be comfortable with it myself. Can you be content in what you have? Because that's what we're called to be, is to be content with what we have. And if we notice that when we're talking about being a witness and we're around other people, that a lot of our conversations do rotate around what we desire, where we desire to go, what we desire to do, what we desire to drive, what we desire to have, where we desire to swim, where we desire, whatever. It's around our desires. And we're talking to people, and you know where our desires are at? They rotate around money. Because to get those desires, we need more money. And the reason that we feel like we need those things is because we've seen other people do those things. And it's not fair that Marcella and her sister get to go to like the Open and they get to watch all this stuff and everything. It doesn't matter that her sister works there and they put in all the hard work and that's part of what she does. It's not fair. Me and Mary want to go too. Right? And so when we think about that, we're like, well, how can we make that happen? Do we run up debit cards? Do we do this or whatever? And we're talking with other people and we're sharing that with other people. And all it shows is that we're not content with what we have. Right? We're not content. It shows how we're caught up in the rat race of want. 1 Timothy 6:10 says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, and into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil." Now, do catch that, because people sometimes say, for the love of money is the root. It is a root. It is a pathway to all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. One way to demonstrate Christ and point to others is when they see your contentment. When they see your joy in life. Whatever status you have, I promise you, no matter where you're at on a social ladder, no where you're at on a financial ladder, no matter where you're at in life, that there's people that are below you on life's ladder, and there's people that are above you on life's ladder. Okay? By the world standards. But if you can be content where you're at on the rung, wherever you're at, then not only will the people above you notice, but the people below you will notice, and they'll want to know why. They'll want to know why you're different. Why is it that you don't desire, now that you have this great house, why is it that you don't desire to have another house in the mountains? Why is it that you don't desire to have 2 more houses if you already have 2 houses? Why is it that you don't desire to have your own island? What's wrong with you? Why is it that you don't desire to have your own country? Why stop at an island? There's always more out there, and whatever ladder you're on, if you're part of the world, you should desire more, and that should be your drive. But a Christian's different. They're content. They're content in where God has them. That doesn't mean that you have to be content with where you're at in life. You're content with the circumstances in your life. You can always improve yourself. You can always be spiritually growing. You don't have to be content there, but you can be content in what you have. And that makes you different. So in conclusion, all the things that we're called to do so far from the Hebrews is to point towards God, to be a witness. Now, the funny thing about being a witness is that we really need to understand what that means, right? Because if you've ever been in a courtroom and you watch somebody that was being tried, okay, they don't get to speak for themselves. You ever notice that? A lawyer has to speak for themselves. As a matter of fact, if they stand up and they don't like what the lawyer's saying, if they stand up and say something, then the judge is going to hold them in contempt, tell them to shut up, because somebody else has to speak for them. And there's other people that will be brought in to say what they see in the person, right? So, when we're going through this list, and look at this, to love one another as a family, to show hospitality towards strangers, to remember those who suffer, and to honor our marriages, and be content and trust in God. When we're talking about these 5 things, okay, these are not things, what I want you to understand, being a witness for God, pointing to God and everything, these are not things that you're allowed to explain to others. Oh, what do you mean by that, Pastor Danny? Well, you can't say, well, I do love other people, and if I was given the opportunity to explain how busy my life is, then they would understand that I have a lot going on. No. Intent is not witnessing. Your intent inside doesn't matter. Okay, if I was given the opportunity to explain, I do love my Christian family, but Sally drives me crazy and I don't want to be around her. And everybody knows I don't want to be around her. Love everybody like family. But if I was given the opportunity to explain, you don't know how Sally talks to me. You don't know. Intent is not witnessing. Show hospitality to strangers. Well, if I had the opportunity to explain, I didn't know their need. I didn't know. Remember those who suffer, or honor marriage. You see, all of us believe in our mind that if we were given the opportunity, we could explain why we came across so rudely. We can explain why we didn't do this. If we're given the opportunity to present our case, then we absolutely will come out smelling holier than thou. But you see, that's not being a witness. It's not your intent that matters, it's your actions. It's your actual actions that matter. You're not going to be given the opportunity in the world to explain yourself. So you need to live in a manner so you don't have to. You need to live in a manner that points to God. Not what you intend, but what you do. And that's the challenge that lies before us this morning. Is when you're looking down that fence line today, are you seeing fruit in any of those areas, or are some of those areas challenging to you? Go back to the source. Get more seeds. Let us stand this morning. Matthew will lead us in song, and we can raise our voices in praise of God. And whatever has been laid on your heart, if there's something that challenges you, you can give it over to God this morning.